We're going to go ahead and get started momentarily. We're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. This County Board work session is now called to order. This is Chair Christian Dorsey presiding, and all board members are in attendance. Vice Chair Libby Garvey, board members Matt DeFerranti, Tanya Talento, and Takis Karantonis. Today's subject matter is a discussion of the planned Langston Boulevard effort, and specifically the Langston Boulevard area plan, which was published in June of this year. This large area plan serves to bring planning guidance of a more granular level to than what is currently provided in the general land use plan, as well as the even overarching comprehensive plan which govern future development in the county. We have well-detailed and reasonably recently updated planning guidance for a lot of Arlington's other corridors: Roslyn-Ballston, Richmond Highway, Columbia Pike, Shirlington. But Langston Boulevard serves as something of an anomaly. The entirety of the corridor has been unaddressed from a planning perspective since the formation of the General Land Use Plan in 1961. And Langston Boulevard, the conditions provide and have some key attributes that lend themselves well to this form of comprehensive long-range planning. We have a transit network that supports and has supported the development of these naturally occurring activity hubs along the corridor. The built environment has various buildings and circumstances that have immediate, mid, and long-range plans or timelines for reinvestment. Existing neighborhoods and businesses whose value can shape unique guidance to facilitate placemaking at various nodes along the corridor. These are some pretty great assets, but without intentionality, it's not necessarily going to come to pass that these will produce results that are consistent with what the neighborhoods immediately surrounding Langston Boulevard want, or what we would want for our entire county for this very, very key area. So the planning effort has been underway for a number of years and has a unique origin story, which we'll probably get into a little bit with this work session. But this is an opportunity to accomplish a few key goals: to provide an update to everyone, board members as well as the community, on really where we are since the plan was drafted in June of this year, to also have an opportunity to share what have been some community inputs that have come in response to the plan, and that can be a collaborative approach. We've heard some things that maybe staff has not, and vice versa, and then also to really focus and put on the table any work that needs to be done to get us to the place where we advertise the draft plan for ultimate consideration for adoption, which will occur in the coming months. So that is our purpose for the afternoon. We are going to be guided by an extensive staff presentation, which will be broken up in sections with opportunities for board members to ask questions, have discussion, and offer feedback. And with that, I think we're ready to get into it. I'll turn it over to our county manager, Mark Schwartz, to kick us off.
Thank you, Mr. Dorsey and members of the board. I'm going to get right to it. I wanted to first thank Natasha Alfonso Ahmed, who's going to be making the presentation for devoting a considerable portion of her life to this project. So over to you, Natasha.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. So as the board knows, thank you, and the slides are up. Staff is in the process of developing and ultimately adopting a comprehensive, high-level vision for the corridor that will guide both public and private investment long-term. We are currently completing Phase 3. If we can go on to the next slide, please. Phase 3 of a multi-phase, and one more, thanks, of a multi-phase planning study which began in 2019. Based on prior analysis and community feedback, we developed and released the draft plan in June of this year, which includes new policies to support the goals and vision of a green Main Street, as well as preliminary information on implementation. Next slide. So the plan's vision and recommendations for corridor-wide elements, which include transportation and open space, apply to the complete planning area. The plan's recommendations focus primarily on the core area, which is outlined in pink on this map, and includes areas that are located on or nearest to Langston Boulevard, areas designated for commercial or multifamily uses on the county's general land use plan, and in limited locations, areas that include single detached homes. Recommendations for all elements will apply to the core study area for areas 2 and 3 and 5, which includes 5 West and 5 East. Areas 1 and 4, which are East Falls Church and Cherrydale, respectively, have adopted plans and policies that will continue to apply there. Next slide. The plan's policies and recommendations are centered around sustainability, environmental resilience, and equity by applying a sustainable and equitable approach to land uses, by leveraging proximity to transit and existing activity centers to reduce travel times and carbon emissions, and by increasing housing supply and meeting the needs of diverse residents and household types. Next slide. The plan proposes goals and policies for each of the 9 key planning elements supported by design principles and guidelines that are related to the building environment and the public realm. The core study area is primarily characterized by low-rise commercial land uses, surface parking, and pockets of multifamily residential properties. Surrounding the corridor are lower density residential neighborhoods comprising approximately 72% of the planning area. Commercial areas have extensive impervious surfaces and aging buildings that are not energy efficient. Other than in Cherrydale and East Falls Church, the corridor also lacks mixed-use development that supports a walkable Main Street environment. The current housing mix in the planning area provides limited opportunities for lower middle-income households. As we know, the county's population is less racially diverse, younger, and more affluent than the larger metropolitan area. The corridor itself also has lower percentages of residents of color and is more affluent, but slightly older than the county as a whole. The plan uses the county's equity lens to understand whether and where racial inequities exist or are being exacerbated, and includes recommendations to mitigate or minimize those burdens for current and future residents. To achieve the vision for a green Main Street that links neighborhoods to businesses, mixed-use activity nodes, housing, and public spaces, a new land use framework is needed. This map illustrates how development should be concentrated on the mixed-use activity hubs, connected by areas that are predominantly multifamily to expand opportunities for increasing the housing supply along the corridor. The plan proposes 4 new activity hubs in addition to East Falls Church and Cherrydale. The land use framework supports the policies on economic vitality and housing by concentrating development in the core areas that support both commercial activity and jobs, and expand the residential uses and densities that are allowed in those areas to increase the housing supply and levels of affordability. The policies on building form are aimed at achieving context-sensitive building design by focusing the tallest building heights at activity hubs, key intersections, and within walking distance of metro and bus stops, and by establishing minimum setbacks, upper story stepbacks, and desired height transitions. The policies also focus on achieving development that offers a healthy urban environment, enhancing connections to nature, and retrofitting surface parking with landscaping to reduce impervious surfaces. Langston Boulevard is an auto-oriented corridor with narrow sidewalks, minimal tree cover, wide lanes that encourage high speeds and vehicular traffic, which is, as you all know, very harsh for pedestrians and bicyclists. It is mostly 4 lanes with the exception of a 6-lane segment east of I-66. The greatest impediment is the numerous driveways that create conflicts between all modes, resulting in numerous crashes. The plan promotes new streetscapes, trees, and additional amenities to create pedestrian-friendly environments. The policies on transportation focus on creating complete streets that accommodate all modes of travel adequately and safely, reducing driveways to minimize conflict points, expanding the street, pedestrian, and bicycle networks, enhancing transit service, and promoting different parking strategies. There are 24 existing public spaces in the planning area with varying types of amenities. However, they're not always very well connected, and some neighborhoods lack spaces. With increased growth, there will be a need for additional public spaces in the core area. The policies for public spaces, which are in alignment with the PSMP, focus on expanding the network by achieving new privately owned public spaces with redevelopment, providing a variety of space types and expanding connections to these spaces. Through this plan, there is a potential to achieve an additional 28 spaces in the core area over time. Only 21% of the core area has tree canopy coverage compared to the county average of 40%. Approximately 70% of the core area is impervious, which is also located along the top of 13 watersheds, causing increased flooding in downstream neighborhoods. The plan recommends detention and overland relief in specific locations where new parks, plazas, or greenways are recommended as part of redevelopment to detain water or provide a safe path for the water to flow. The plan's goal is to incentivize positive change in the core areas by providing other choices besides by right development, which only exacerbate the problems that we have today. This could require greater reliance on public funds and fewer strategic public-private projects to achieve the desired improvements, thus lengthening the time that it will take to meet the countywide priorities. On the other hand, if we proactively plan for change in coordination with other countywide plans and policies and regulations, we have a better chance of controlling the outcome and meeting the county's goals and the community's aspirations. So with the draft plan that was released in June, we provided numerous opportunities for community discussions, which included in-person open houses of the design studio, focus group meetings with various representatives of the community forum and civic associations, and an online engagement forum. As we move forward with the upcoming public hearings to request advertisement of the draft plan in October, we'll continue to conduct briefings with the commissions and advisory boards. And obviously, we will document the comments and staff responses in the staff report when we submit that. So thank you. This concludes my opening presentation, and I will share more information after we hear again from the community partners in part 4.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ahmed. And as we alluded to at the very beginning, this planning effort has a little bit of a different origin story than maybe perhaps some others, with there being some community-generated interest from the very beginning, and as a result, the planning process has incorporated community perspectives at each and every step of the way in ways that may be different than what we've done for prior planning efforts. So at this time, we're going to invite Sandy Chesrown and Ginger Brown to offer some perspectives in their respective roles with the Langston Boulevard Alliance and with Plan Langston Boulevard, the community forum of Plan Langston Boulevard. Hopefully I got all of the various structures and agencies correct there. Who would like to start off? Sandy?
Oh, sure. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Sandy Chesrown, and I'm here as the vice chair of the Community Forum. A decade ago, as Christian alluded, Ginger Brown and I knew we could make a difference for Waverly Hills with county funding of our neighborhood conservation plan. But we didn't really know how we could provide a greater voice for the communities. Without the help of many who are not here today, John Kinney, Bob Duffy, Mary Hines, Jay Fassett, Sandra Green, and many others in the community, and all of you, the county board, the county managers, staff, and AECOM, we never would have succeeded with such robust stakeholder engagement. So thank you for that. When Mark Schwartz appointed Paul Holland and me to head the community forum comprised of 52 commission and community members, he did not expect us to be silent. We have taken his charge seriously and interviewed nearly all the commissions, the civic associations, and other groups. Yesterday, we sent the county board a very brief summary of our concerns and the opportunities for tweaking the June plan, a very good plan. The lens of environmental planning and climate change. The need to clarify public and private investment in stormwater management to stop flooding now and alleviate the heat index in the future, and to clarify community benefits at site plan review to produce buildings with much lower carbon footprints and recognize the value of repurposing and embodied energy. The lens of equity and the need for county capital investment in affordable housing, both CAFs and the preservation of marks. Improve bus transit and bus shelters and public gathering spaces. 3 robust community centers, hopefully with stakeholder engagement in 2024. The Gray House for Black Heritage, a library and space for the arts, and real public open space to meet the needs of thousands of additional residents. Enhanced community with a couple of reduced building heights in Area 5 and Area 3. Enhanced economy with sufficient parking and creative placemaking to continue the corridor's long tradition of providing services and retail businesses while adding more residential housing. In summary, 10 months ago, I was celebrating my birthday in Marrakesh, never imagining the sorrow today and the impact of nature. Let us be grateful for Arlington today, but let us recognize the Arlington of tomorrow and the impact of climate change. It is now, and it is bigger than all of us. As the late, great Desmond Tutu said, 25 years ago, people could be excused for not knowing much or doing much about climate change. Today, we have no excuse. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. And, certainly if you have any loved ones or colleagues in Morocco, I hope they're all well. Ginger.
Hi. Well, thank you for having me, Chair Dorsey and members of the County Board and County Manager Schwartz. For the past 11 years, Sandy and I have spent working with the community's many stakeholders, including civic associations, advocacy groups, business owners, 11 county board members, commissions, and numerous staff. Through countless educational forums, walking tours, presentations, serving on commissions, and one-on-one meetings. We have a comprehensive knowledge of Arlington, how Arlington fits, or how Langston Boulevard fits into it, and the community's vision for its future. The community's vision, going back to the beginning of the grassroots effort in 2012, is to create an inclusive, walkable, community-serving commercial hubs that support small business and create a sense of place. Langston Boulevard serves a large geographic area. Tens of thousands of Arlingtonians rely on it for their daily services, such as preschools, groceries, medical services, and restaurants. We have a very low retail vacancy rate. The businesses thrive because of those customers. Today, most of those customers drive. While many new customers who walk and bike may be added in the future, it is essential to continue to serve the entire geographic base that uses the corridor. A goal of the plan should be to create and retain community serving retail and to incentivize and plan for publicly accessible parking like was done in Alexandria and Bethesda. To create the community's vision for inclusive neighborhood serving commercial nodes, we need to support small businesses while simultaneously increasing affordable housing. Balancing the complicated equations for base and bonus density, equations that only land use attorneys seem to understand, is really tricky. It will be said that if you rebalance the equation on the side of the small businesses, there will be less resources for affordable housing. However, that is an incomplete narrative. There are other tools that must be considered. The plan must acknowledge and refocus on the tried and true way to create committed affordable units, partnering with our nonprofit partners to acquire land. It will be essential along Langston Boulevard, as it is an essential in the county driver to create affordable housing, and it will be essential along Langston Boulevard as well. Although the plan isn't a budget document, it should acknowledge the importance of this foundational tool, and the board should accompany the passage of this plan with a promise to support land acquisition through the budget process. Additionally, many stakeholders are very nervous about the density envisioned in the plan. 10, 12, 15-story buildings on the non-metro corridor feels like a lot of change. Lots more cars and traffic. That nervousness is compounded by two things. First, the commitment to the transit is fairly weak. With all of the new residents coming to the corridor, the community feels the plan needs to be bolder in its transit recommendations. Plan Langston Boulevard should call for 10-minute headways, timing that makes living on the corridor without a car possible while helping to mitigate the community's congestion concerns. There also needs to be more consideration for north-south transit routes. Second, the slow pace of improvement. The community has shown up to decades worth of meetings and hasn't seen any safety improvements, and it's frustrating. It's time to start making Langston a better and safer place in the next round of CIP funding. Sandy addressed climate change and stormwater, so I won't, but I'll encourage you to ponder the other open community questions like allowing arts and culture to be integrated in the plan, transparency when it comes to deciding the future of our public facilities and parks, flexibility and connections, bigger discussion on trade-offs between bike lanes in our commercial zones, historic considerations for the height in the Halls Hill Park neighborhood, preservation of Lee Heights shops, and expanding our parks for the future. Clarity is needed. Thank you for consideration. And if I had more time, I would talk about all the positive parts of the plan because it is a good plan. Thank you.
I'm glad you both mentioned that, albeit briefly. All right. Get it.
Negotiating technique for more time.
So, thank you both, and we do appreciate it. And note also that Jim Lantelmi, the president of the Langston Boulevard Alliance, has joined us in the audience, and I believe Paul may be watching us remotely. So we do appreciate all of the work that you all have put in over many, many years and in many, many meetings and fits and starts. So turn it back over to Natasha to continue with the staff presentation. What we're going to do at this point is really look at two key areas, colleagues, the built environment and then the public realm. And after a conversation about what has changed and evolved from the preliminary concept plan to the current draft, we'll just do some checks based on a few questions to really make sure we're on the right glide path towards consideration of adoption.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Perfect, okay. All right, so to support the land use framework, the use maps indicate where mixed-use development and other uses are recommended and identify ground floor priority areas, which are areas where the ground floor should remain non-residential and where spaces should be built as commercial ready and able to support retail or retail equivalent uses when the market can deliver. So two overall concerns that we've heard regarding the proposed framework are the first is related to the proposed scale and extent of change in the core area, and the second is related to the potential impact on existing businesses with redevelopment. Next slide. So for the proposed scale and extent of change, the concerns are centered around the proposed building heights and densities, the inclusion of a few single detached lots in the core areas, and the inclusion of a portion of the Cherrydale neighborhood, which is outside of the Cherrydale Revitalization District. Regarding height, staff has indicated that additional density is needed to encourage special exception development that helps implement the vision and achieve countywide goals for housing, sustainability, and placemaking. While we have minimized the extent of change in the residential edges, there are still a few single detached lots that are included to help facilitate mixed use, affordable housing, and other multimodal improvements. Additionally, the residential edges between Waverly Hills and the Cherrydale Revitalization District are also included in this plan to establish a cohesive vision along the corridor for mixed use and high density residential. So at this time, there are no changes that are recommended to address these particular concerns. Next slide. In terms of the potential impact on existing businesses as a result of redevelopment, the concerns are mostly around the potential displacement of existing legacy and small businesses, with rents becoming too expensive, insufficient parking or parking that is not accessible for people who still want to drive, and the desire to expand ground floor priority areas and require prime retail spaces along the corridor. Today, businesses along the corridor are already threatened by a number of factors, including significant regional competition and aging structures. There are trade-offs to redevelopment. However, increased density does provide opportunities for new businesses and jobs. In terms of parking, all new development will be expected to provide the minimum required parking. The plan does encourage and allow all forms of parking while also encouraging reduced minimums for projects within walking distance of metro and transit. The plan recognizes that the retail experience is continuing to evolve, and in some areas where prime retail was required, it has resulted in vacant commercial spaces. So to avoid an oversupply of retail space along Langston Boulevard, the plan should be flexible to meet the market demand. At this time, there are no changes recommended to address these concerns. Next slide. The Affordable Housing Master Plan indicated a need for 2,500 affordable units by 2040 through a combination of committed and market rate affordable units. The June draft provided preliminary figures on the potential housing supply and CAFs, which you can see on the slide, along with the current distribution of affordable units by neighborhood area. These projections are still under review and will be shared with the RTA draft. Next slide. The concerns around housing were mostly about the potential concentration of affordable units in some areas with existing affordable housing, the prioritization of renovated marks, and opportunities for revisiting the East Falls Church and Cherrydale plans to optimize the affordable housing supply. From staff's perspective, the proposed affordability is expected to remain distributed across the corridor with the greatest share in areas 3 and 5 West. To support the plan's vision for increased housing supply and affordability, the plan sets policies for increasing CAFs through redevelopment and infill of sites with existing CAFs, through renegotiated CAF agreements and conversion of marks to CAFs. While renovation may reduce carbon impacts, it limits opportunity to increase the overall housing supply and affordable units along the corridor. East Falls Church and Cherrydale plans can be reviewed in the future for greater alignment with the corridor-wide policies and goals. The timing for that will be considered as part of the annual work plan discussion. So again, at this time, no changes are recommended to address these specific concerns. Next slide. The building height maps are responsive to mixed feedback we heard during the development of the preliminary concept plan when we studied the trade-offs for different densities and building heights. The community feedback on the PCP raised concerns on heights in certain geographies, but also suggested that Langston Boulevard is critical to meeting many county policies and goals, and that the PCP was not bold enough to help meet those goals. Based on conversations with the LBA and community forum leaders to consider additional height, staff increased the building heights in the areas outlined in red to provide additional opportunities for implementing the vision through private redevelopment. However, concerns related to building heights, setbacks, upper story step backs, and impacts to traffic and school capacity still remain. Next slide. So the greatest concerns with the increased heights are in at the George Mason Drive intersection, north of Moore's Barbershop, between Glebe Road and Woodstock, and at the Air Force Association site in Area 5 East. In areas 2 and 3, the proposed heights in those locations are appropriate given the depths of the parcels and sufficient space for height transitions. For the Air Force Association site, the draft RTA plan will change and show a reduced height maximum of up to 7 stories, which would still allow additional stories in the sloping topography at the Langston-Oak Street intersection without creating any shadow or sun impacts on the residential edges to the north. Next slide. The design guidelines provide recommendations for setbacks and upper story step backs, particularly for new development abutting and across the street from low-density residential edges. Some community members have requested adjustments to the proposed dimensions to limit the impacts on the abutting homes and the existing dense tree canopy. Staff has determined that the proposed setbacks and upper story step backs would create a more favorable condition than what the current building provides. In general, the proposed dimensions are appropriate for most parcels abutting low-density residential edges, and with the next RTA draft, we do expect to further clarify those dimensions. Next slide. In Area 5 West, we've received requests for height increases by multifamily, commercial, and single detached property owners between Adams and Beach Streets. A cluster of townhouses and a few single detached dwellings exist there today. The single detached owners are requesting additional height to allow for consolidation with the abutting townhouse development. In this area, the plan recommends up to 5 stories, which allows for redevelopment. Staff does not recommend changing the proposed heights at this time. However, in the future, if the owners are interested in consolidating, the residential densities and heights can be further reevaluated. Next slide. Overall, there is concern about the potential impacts on traffic and school capacity as a result of the increased density. These impacts were evaluated for the PCP based on the taller height scenario, which is very similar to the proposed heights in the draft plan. The analysis showed that while there were impacts to vehicular travel times along Langston, they will be manageable and offset by the safety improvements achieved for all modes of travel and by the improvements to the pedestrian, bicycle, and transit network. APS used the potential development forecasts and applicable student generation rates by housing type to estimate the future potential enrollment along the corridor by 2030. And based on this analysis, the existing schools will provide sufficient capacity. So as a result of those two data points, no changes are recommended to address those concerns. Next slide. The plan's policies for historic preservation focus on honoring the significant resources along the corridor by recommending partial or full preservation. It also allows for interpretation and redevelopment to help meet other important countywide and plan goals. There are several property owners who are requesting to remove the preservation recommendations. Additional language will be provided in the RTA draft to clarify that the preservation and interpretation decisions should be balanced with other countywide and plan goals. So I'll pause here, Mr. Chair, and turn it back to you for county board discussion on the built environment.
Thank you very much. So colleagues, we gone through about, 29, 30 slides here. And at this point, we're really going to focus our conversation on the built environment and what has been presented thus far, and really no bounds on what our conversation can include. So whenever you're ready, while you're teeing it off, I'll just sort of note, particularly as it relates to housing, there's been a lot of discussion about the housing impacts and certainly the overall growth impact. And just as a reminder, this plan has a fairly long-term horizon. We're looking at, in many ways, a projection of the near doubling of housing units along the corridor by 2075, so not an immediate impact. I believe that some of the correspondence that we've received has somewhat assumed that this impact would be realized immediately and have questioned the sufficiency of the infrastructure and the impacts because of that. Again, this plan is not projecting that impact to occur immediately or necessarily be front-loaded, but to be distributed throughout the next approximately 50 years. Okay, so with that, I see Vice Chair Garvey, who's got
Yeah,
her
I
light
had
on.
two sort of basic questions that I realize I just want to make sure I understand. One, simply for the RTA, when we advertise heights. You know, you can advertise higher. So if we have a higher height and we at adoption want to lower the heights, I believe we can do that. That's correct. I've seen head nods. Okay, good. I don't even need Min Chow here today. Thank you. And then one other question. Natasha, you're talking about how with the topography, it might, more height than 7 stories could be allowed, because could you, but yet you're putting in 7 stories. Could you talk, because I thought if we're talking about stories rather than height, anyway, to explain how that actually works.
Sure.
I mean, I understand the point of it, and it makes sense, but
course.
tell me how, if we advertise 7 stories, we could do more.
So the plan utilizes both height in terms of feet and stories, because we recognize that in every location, you know, we have very idiosyncratic sites along the corridor. Some have very steep differences in terms of topography between a low-density residential edge and a more dense commercial edge, and others are pretty much at the same level. So to allow for additional height in certain locations, we're going to be clarifying how you measure height along the corridor. So we have certain rules in the way that we review projects where the average height elevation or site elevation is used to measure height. But there are some areas along the corridor that could benefit from additional stories or additional height where it wouldn't impact any adjacent
Yeah, exactly.
or abutting
Had a nice
low-density
tour.
residential
Thank you.
edges. So
Yeah.
it's another way of saying, as long as you're protecting and you're creating the necessary step backs to create smooth transitions, you should be able to accommodate as many floors as you can.
So we could say 7 stories, but you're going to come up with some detail to say that it could be 9, because effectively it'll feel like 7
Right.
because of the slope of the
Because of the
topography.
slope, right.
Right, okay, as long as that can be, but I just wasn't clear how we would manage to do that if we were talking about stories or
We will be
actual height.
clarifying how
Okay.
height is measured.
Thank you, okay, just those basic things for the
Yeah.
moment. I'll pass the mic.
Thank you. Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to staff for a lot of work over many years. Very grateful for it. I guess I have a question on heights. Just seeing if I'm sort of understanding, there are a couple of areas the corner of George Mason and Langston, I think the recommendation on all four corners is for 6 stories, right? And is there a historic piece to that? I think we received some feedback on a request for 5 stories. I'm not familiar off the top with the building or the historic value there.
So at that intersection, there are no historic resources that we've identified. It's all pretty much commercial development.
Got it. Okay, I may follow up there. And then there was a question about 12 and 10 stories in Area 5. This is up, as I understand it, up from the sort of, as you come out from DC, up Langston, past the Air Force Building. And those couple of areas, they're currently marked as 12, and they're sort of within the neighborhood tucked along I-66, and that is the position. Is there any, that wasn't in the PCP, but the thinking is that there is available additional density or height there that would be appropriate, is that?
That's correct.
Okay, great. I'll yield, unless I do have a housing question, but I'll yield. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we'll come back to you. We'll go to Mr. Carantonis and then Ms. Talento.
Thank you. First of all, yes, indeed, this is an awesome body of work. Thank you very, very, very much for leading that effort. And I understand that you had a lot to absorb, and still it's a lot that is absorbed. On the issue of urban form, so on the proposed, that's in Area 3 where the Lee Heights shops are. So there is a transition from 2 to 10, correct? And the idea there is 2 is basically a preservation
Of the Lee
formula
Heights
for
shops.
the shops.
Yes, that's correct.
Compensated by 10 stories in the back.
That's correct, yes.
And how do the shop owners, the owners there of the landowners absorb that? How do they
feel about
yeah.
it? Well, we've heard different opinions over the last several years. I don't think they were thinking of preservation at the very beginning, but at some point in the process, when we've met with them, they were interested in preservation if they had the
have thriving
opportunity
businesses, yeah.
to develop the back without much disruption of the businesses themselves, which takes coordination. But as far as I know, they've considered all options, including complete redevelopment of the site.
Mm-hmm. And so the entirety of the site, I mean, for me, the important thing, what I understand we are intending to preserve here is the vitality and the nice business environment there. This is really one of the center, I mean, best pieces of neighborhood retail there. It's actually very attractive to others that come from across Arlington, across the region to there. So there will be a huge it will be disrupted the moment that this is going to be redeveloped. So the question is, what else is in the mix there? Public space, the front, et cetera. What is the proposal of improvement there?
At the Lee Heights shop site specifically, so we are recommending major improvements to Cherry Hill Road, which is, the property has frontage on that road. If you recall, there's backup parking, the sidewalk, while it does allow for some outdoor seating and all of that, it's quite narrow.
Yeah.
So the plan recommends to convert that into a more walkable street, potentially a festival street that could be converted, as you've seen, during the Earth Day events, into a special event space. So really widening the sidewalk, adding street trees, which are absolutely necessary there. So on that site, there are proposed recommendations for streetscape improvements around the whole perimeter of the property. To the south of that, the properties, which is the Lucky Gardens apartment site, is also recommended for not detention, but overland relief, and basically setback to be able to create a greenway connection for pedestrian activity. So really, these sites have to kind of work together in being able to create a more urban, walkable environment. So it's important that they coordinate on any improvements that are needed in the future.
Okay, I understand. The other question was, and we heard neighbors coming up to us, is the intersection where the barber shop is, with, small and, I understand, difficult to develop lots. So there was consternation with the neighbors on South Columbus Street, et cetera,
Yes.
22nd Street, about the proviso of, or the lack of ability to step them down or to have neighborhood matters. How do we deal with that in the proposal?
Well, you are correct in that those parcels along Langston are probably the most constrained in anywhere along Langston. Some of those parcels are only 40 feet deep. That's not sufficient to create an efficient commercial structure. That's why the buildings that are there are pretty small. And so in order to encourage consolidation of the parcels and improvements along Langston Boulevard, particularly to create wider sidewalks, because we need more space from the private development, consolidation is going to be key. And that is the reason why the residential edges or the single-family lots that are in the back were included in the plan. And in terms of the height, as we know, the commercial properties today can build up to 45 feet, depending if you're C1 or C2. And what this plan tries to do is build a little bit more of an incentive to encourage, again, the consolidation that we need to achieve those multimodal improvements. And so the plan recommends up to 5 stories, which is not much more, but it might be sufficient to kind of spur that.
I understand that, and for me, this was an example of showing where, we are thinking about feasibility, and because we have a very long list of deliverables here. We heard a lot about environmental sustainability, about neighborhood matters, about form and actually architecture, et cetera. This needs to be compensated, somehow it needs to be paid for when we build. So I'm concerned about those sites, that they are so narrow in terms of their, it's not out of the realm to think about the feasibility of these sites. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll want to put a marker in to revisit that geographic area, but Ms. Talento, you're first.
Thank you, Chair Dorsey. I wanted to first, as I've been reading through the plan, this is just a comment for your consideration. Often through the plan, it's mentioned that, and you have this on slide 8 as well, that the corridor has lower percentages of residents of color and is more affluent, but slightly older than the county as a whole, and that current housing mix provides limited opportunities for low to middle income households. And throughout the plan, for those who don't know the corridor or don't know North Arlington, there's this assumption that it is not as diverse and more affluent, but it is one of the most diverse and less affluent strips in all of North Arlington, especially the most northern part of that. And so I think a lot of the development and advocacy for preservation, and as we're looking at CAFs and marks, lend itself to this corridor because of what already exists there in the history. And so I just think qualifying that for community members, we had some advocacy in the past where people assumed that Langston Boulevard, who may have not lived there or explored there, was much like other parts of more northern Arlington. And that's really not the case. We have a very diverse community. And even in the plan, it states that I think it's Area 2 and Area 5 actually are higher or in line with the rest of the county. So if we could just provide some clarifying language so that we're really noting the uniqueness of this corridor in North Arlington as we look at the history of our county where diversity has been split between north and south in some ways, especially as we're honoring like Halls Hills and other historic communities there. I just think it's really important that we are clear on that. So I just wanted to make that comment. The other thing I wanted to get clarification on, and this will probably go to maybe a later point, is there's a couple of places where we talk about the goal of 2,500 affordable units. And in some places it's a combination of marks and CAFs. And in other places it looks like there's an inference that it's all CAFs. And we've heard, at least I've heard from different advocates, the same. Someone saying, well, no, it's all CAFs. And someone saying, no, it's a mix of marks and CAFs. So can you clarify what it actually is so that we can then enter into a discussion about that?
Sure. So the Affordable Housing Master Plan goal is for both
Okay.
the CAFs and marks. But the marks are limited to up to 60% of the area median income. And that's important because I think the Affordable Housing Master Plan recognizes that the whole corridor, or not all of the units are going to convert to CAFs. And marks will always continue to stay there for as long as they can, as long as they're not renovated or redeveloped. And so really the goal is to try to have a combination.
Okay.
Because it provides, again, different types of housing types.
Okay, so I think, and we can look at the pages later, but there are a couple places where it's not clear. And I think it's really important as we have a lot of affordable housing advocates who are focusing on strictly CAFs and understanding that, and especially as we move forward in development. And that'll bring me back to my my next point where you're asking about like what's missing or what we're not prioritizing. I am a little bit concerned about in the plan where it mentions things of the nature, like we have, marks, we have marks up to 80%, we have this many marks to 60%, understanding the increase of, the 60% AMI. But then there's places where it says, but these having marks does not predispose them, does not preclude them from future development, right? And so when I look at Columbia Pike, we have huge sections of marks, huge developments that are pretty big. When we redeveloped Columbia Pike, I used to live on Columbia Pike. When we redeveloped Columbia Pike, we lost some of the marks. But because of these two big developments, we still have a good amount of marks. We do not have any real developments from Spout Run, towards East Falls Church like that. So I do worry about us saying that because there's no real place where we're preserving those marks. And it looks like the historic the HCDs, I can't remember what they stand for. We have one that's going to be de-designated because of the plan. So just thinking about that, I think really prioritizing on preserving marks. I know there's been some advocacy for like a TIF for different things. Maybe we do that to help owners who have marks, rehabilitate their places and keep them that way. So just thinking about that, if our goal is that, especially in, I can't remember if it was one of the recent plans on a affordable housing master plan that talks about over the next 30 years, our AMI community, our 120% and below AMI community is going to increase, with some of our community members, 120% and above, actually exiting the county, right? So I just want to be thoughtful about how we look at that, and I'm supportive of affordable housing. I agree with some of the points that have been made about working with our affordable housing developers to really ensure that we're getting affordable housing. I do worry about development, especially with the rights to contribute money to affordable housing versus putting in affordable housing units. And the fact that they're only putting in 5 to 10, I don't know if we've had any that have put significantly more than 10 in at any point in time on site. So just being intentional about, maybe incentivizing that or clarifying that. Or I think there's been a recommendation someplace about a TIF that would go to partnering with affordable housing investment on the corridor. I'll stop there, Chair Dorsey.
Okay, thank you. I think we're ready for round 2 on this. We'll start with Vice Chair Garvey.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to return a little bit to where Mr. Carantonis left off on the 5 stories for businesses. I'll let her just, yeah. No, it's okay. On the 5 stories for, what about 6 or 7? Stick-built can go up to 6, or is it 7? Up to 7. So why would we think about going up to 7 or allowing that possibly? Because
Sure.
we've got to do a lot of incentivizing to get some building going.
Yes, I mean, the decision to allow up to 6 rather than 7 in those locations really had to do with the community's concern for more height, up to 5.
Yeah, in the
Yes.
area that Mr. Carantonis was talking about.
Yes. Oh, you mean, then I missed it, then I'm sorry, I apologize. You're talking specifically about the Columbus Street.
I'm actually happy to
Area.
have you talk all along, so
And
not just that, but he
20th.
was,
Okay.
I
was
think.
just thinking about how we factor in feasibility when we make a plan, because we can, feasibility is also a point in time consideration. It's something that's not feasible today, may be feasible tomorrow or in 2045, right? The plan is about delivering a public realm, the boulevard, the vision of the boulevard, and along there will be opportunities, etc. I was just thinking about the constraints that need to be taken into account, given the
And Ms.
long
Garvey,
list.
are you talking about that area that Mr. Carantonis
Well,
was referencing?
I was following up where he was,
Right.
but I was really thinking
Okay.
in general, and where I was getting at is why did you not go higher than 5 in general? And what I'm hearing is pushback from the community.
Yes.
And I understand that. Would maybe be interested in a little more flexibility because we need to have, and
Sure.
height right next to a road is different than height right next to a house. So, and I know some of
there
these are
were a
small and they
number-
back up on houses. I know that.
Yeah, so there were a number of factors besides community sentiment and all of that. I mean, we've had to balance that
Oh, we have, I know.
along the entire corridor for all of the neighborhood areas as best as we could. But I mean, in some locations, the 6 was also because there's just not enough depth to really try to transition to the 7th stories. We are providing very specific recommendations for step backs, which are dimensional. And so if the lots or blocks are not deep enough to do so, then we were sensitive and stopped it at a height that we thought was still achievable. We're always going to be balancing between what's economically feasible and not. And we know that the sites that are 5 and even up to 6 are challenged. There is no question about it. It's just that, and you may recall that in the preliminary concept plan, or before that, when we were doing the land use scenario analysis, we had considered extending the areas of change to include the full block on both sides of Langston Boulevard. And particularly in Area 2, where we see the lowest heights, we've limited to just the parcels directly along Langston. And so that also had to, we had to reduce the height in order to create the right transitions, because we were working with less space.
Okay. If I would be interested, if there are some areas where possibly could consider another floor or 2, I would be interested in that, certainly for advertising purposes. So I'd just be interested to know that. And then also on the retail action plan, are we being too restrictive with, the retail action plan dates from before the pandemic. And I have long worried that it's actually too restrictive, like anywhere in the county. I'm a little uncomfortable. Have we sort of thought about that a little bit? Do we really want to go kind of full retail action plan from pre-pandemic here, or do we want to allow some more flexibility?
So this plan, although it references the Arlington retail plan, it does designate both gold and blue areas, gold and blue streets. The gold basically says that spaces in those locations need to be designed with both exterior and interior features that support retail and retail equivalent uses. It's pretty flexible. It doesn't say you have to build, let's say, spaces that accommodate restaurants right off the bat. It does provide more flexibility, and those are in very limited locations that we're showing in each one of these neighborhood areas. For the blue, there's a lot more flexibility. It's basically just the exterior features to encourage walkability, active uses on the ground floor, but we're not necessarily requiring all those spaces to be built out to accommodate restaurants, which we know has expensive ticket items, right, when it comes to the design of the building.
Right.
So we think it's pretty flexible. I think what we're hearing from the community is the opposite. From some members in the community, they're concerned that we're being too flexible and the corridor might turn and become more residential because we're not requiring those spaces.
Right, but once again, we want to make sure that they get used. So it really is a balance. So that's something I'm going to just sort of continue to sort of noodle on. If there's some thoughts of that from staff, that we ought to be a little more flexible, I'm certainly open to that. I understand wanting to have restaurants and things. I just don't want to have a restaurant and you don't have a restaurant, so you have nothing. So we want to make sure we don't overdo it. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. DeFranti, you're round 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, thank you for that discussion was really helpful for me. I am starting the road. I've read the feedback indicating a desire for more sort of node or hub encouraging active space. And I'll confess that between now and the RTA and the close, I need to do more thinking on that. But I'm glad that Vice Chair Garvey surfaced it. Second, I think just for the purposes of kind of showing our math, you guys know this, I think the community knows this. I'm very thankful for the detail on the Lee Heights shop, the continued thinking, and I do kind of, again, associate myself with Vice Chair Garvey in that there's a now, and then there's an RTA, and then there's a final. And so I've got more learning and thinking to do, and certainly APA's letter was helpful in the couple of sentences included there. My specific question is actually on housing. Appreciate Ms. Talento's comments with respect to Marks. I'll confess that though I was part of the working group on the Affordable Housing Master Plan, there's been so much discussion that Marks, I think there's an important policy goal of having of promoting marks that can reach 90 to 110%. I don't believe that we should ever, just my position is that we should not use county funding. We can use land use tools, but I don't think we should subsidize above 100%. As you're trying to sort of absorb Ms. Delento's comments, that's a thought I have about, we want to preserve that for Arlington, our median income being quite high, that middle class opportunity. So maybe that can help you as you're trying to sort of put together Ms. Delento's comments and mine. I guess the biggest thought is on investment, and we did receive feedback. I keep thinking of in some cases, we've recently been receiving land for affordable housing purposes. I think that geographic distribution of affordable housing is super important, and I appreciate the nuance that you described of North Arlington is both Langston Boulevard and further north. I happen to live further north, and there is not enough economic diversity, in my view, further north, and yet tricky to figure out how to do it. I guess, we also have acquired land. So there's a specific, in the feedback we got from the Alliance, there's a specific point to a number of millions, I think it's over 200 million in that we have spent on land acquisition for affordable housing since 2012, but that hasn't been in Langston Boulevard. And I'm not ascribing blame. I'm kind of trying to test and understand if that is a correct insight. And I think it's important to be nuanced here in the sense that there is a cost. If you buy land in the most expensive part of a community, you will likely get fewer units. And that is a cost. But at the same time, if we concentrate affordable housing, we've got a problem, as we know from all the national stuff. So is that number broadly right? And I don't know if you can speak at all, or in follow-up can speak to this question of should we be using for acquisition? I am happy for that long question to be for later. If you could offer a thought or two, that'd be great.
Yeah, maybe what I can do is cue my colleague. I believe either Russell or Richard Tucker are online, or Joel Franklin. They're both in the housing division. And we can come back to it because they do have those numbers, and they can explain more specifically where the money has been allocated and if there are projects that have ever been submitted along Langston. My understanding is there haven't been, but we can maybe come back to that, and we'll cue him.
Sure, that sounds great. And it sounds like the cue is for later, not magically that Mr. Tucker will appear. So that's absolutely fine. I'll yield, but I would say that I am interested in that. It doesn't seem to me enough to say it's more expensive in my neighborhood, therefore not as much affordable housing. That's not, I think we all can agree that's not quite good enough, and I'm not suggesting that staff is in any way supporting that view. I just wanted to say it out loud. Thanks.
Thank you. So I'd like to return a little bit to the conversation initiated by Mr. Carantonis about the neighborhood surrounding or enveloped by 24th Road, North Columbus Street, and Glebe and Langston, that area that you're familiar with around Fire Station 8 and Moore's Barbershop. So, you mentioned that it's one of those, I think your word was idiosyncratic, which I think is the perfect word. It's one of those just unique areas with really shallow depth to which we are trying to figure out what are the appropriate tools to balance all of the various considerations. And before I get to my question, just as a general comment, and feel free to push back if you disagree, the balance that we seek when we talk about height and economic viability is not for the purpose of making a developer happy. It's a recognition that what we're trying to do with this plan is to actually create a change that is more consistent with the plan's vision and principles as opposed to what would happen by right. So the sort of scale balancing is they can do 45 feet by right in a way that really harms the neighboring community. If we figure out how to maybe put more height on the table, that will create an incentive for a developer to come and do a special exception kind of process where we can then shape that at the micro level to be harmonious. That's the approach, right? So with that, given that this area is really idiosyncratic, are there any other tools within the planning world that we could think about in implementation to further maybe guide a developer towards effectuating a certain vision so that we're not just hoping that they come up with something that we like?
Those are all good points. We're not ready yet to talk through what the potential land use tools are, but we are certainly thinking about those very constrained sites, the sites that are limited to the 5 stories and the 6 stories, to see if there are alternative use permit tools or something like that that could encourage those smaller sites to come forward and not just become by right development.
Right.
Yes.
So there are things that we can think about as part of implementation that can be developed over time that could take this broader land use plan and bring it into a little bit more granularity.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Ms. Talento.
Thank you. I just wanted to quickly get clarity on something about the heights. On George Mason and Langston Boulevard, we are at 6 stories. George Mason and that 4 corner, those 6 stories. And then where the Halls Hills area is, those are 5 stories. And that was the area we were just talking about.
That's correct, except the Halls Hill area does extend a little bit towards the intersection. So actually, the southeast corner of that intersection is still in the JM Langston Civic Association. So part of it is part of one of the commercial properties in that civic association is designated for 6 stories.
Okay.
But again, that's because the site is pretty deep. It's one of the very few deep sites.
Okay, great. And I did want to just clarify that I strongly support the committed affordable housing. And my biggest fear is that we're going to end up with a boulevard that has market rate housing and committed affordable housing and nothing in between. And so I'm trying to figure out where that balance is, considering that at least in North Arlington, Langston Boulevard is one of the only places that we have marks for 60 to 80% and maybe 80 to 100%. So this is just so that as you all are taking the feedback, you understand the context behind that. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges, the number of police officers and service people, teachers, fire departments, maybe not teachers as much as teacher assistants, they're not able to live here. And they're living here because a couple police officers are living in a high-rise, and they're getting a discount because there's a police officer in the building, right? This kind of arrangement that we have. And so I'm really worried that we're going to lose a community if we're not careful about how we do this. The other thing and that'll take me to the retail, the small businesses, as we were talking about Lee Heights. We do have a lot of small businesses on the corridor, and many of our businesses are minority-owned. And I worry about how we are thinking about retention of that diverse area. You know, have we considered incentives retention or relocation for some of our small businesses? In particular, I'm thinking about the strip on, again, George Mason and Langston Boulevard. Lee Heights I agree, it's a great area. That's really where community comes in that neighborhood to meet. And I know that there's some areas like where Lions Village is. I think that we have some great businesses there that we could lose if we aren't intentional about incentivizing the priority of the diversity of businesses on the strip. And so I didn't know if you all are thinking about that. I don't find anything that's prioritizing that in the plan or pulling that out. I don't know if we should make it a plan goal or just put it under our commercial retail goals.
So it is in one of our policies to support, the goal for economic vitality is to strengthen the existing commercial base because we know that it's successful. We certainly don't want it to be hindered by whatever happens in the future. But we're also recognizing that change is already affecting a lot of the businesses that are there. I think I mentioned it before, we've got aging buildings that are going to get renovated, and that eventually is going to increase rent prices and basically displace them just naturally. There are a lot of businesses that have been there for a very long time that have no succession plans, and we're learning about these things. And so we're not going to be able to retain every business or every building along the corridor forever. Eventually, things will change. But to your point about the policies do talk about, let's work together to figure out a way that we can retain what we can for as long as we can, because we know that some things are not always going to be there forever. We mentioned the CPACE program, which helps to provide tax incentives, for properties who want to become more green. We mentioned very lightly, but because we don't really have that program in place in full force in the county, but we do talk about maybe there's opportunities for creating like a commercial revitalization program or something like that, where there could be grants or something that can be given to commercial properties if they want to renovate. That will help them buy themselves a little bit more time. The county certainly has other programs that helps with business plans and just, educating the business community in this ever-evolving market, right, and retail environment that we know has changed and has certainly been impacted by the recent things that have happened in the world with the pandemic and everything else that are affecting businesses. And so it's really about a toolkit. The other thing that we always keep in mind is when we talk to property owners, and there's many along the corridor, I think you mentioned the Lion Village Shopping Center, that property owner who's interested in redeveloping that site has always said, and I'm not going to quote him and hold him to it forever, but has always said, we want to keep the Italian shop there because it's been a longstanding business and it's something that they feel proud of. So as we go through site plan reviews and projects, there's a lot of conversations that can be had with those property owners to encourage them to perhaps retain some of those special things along the way. Can we force it? No, but we can certainly put lots of policies and things that indicate that's certainly something we want to accomplish, but we've got to recognize the flexibility. So we're back to what do? We have to balance things, and that's really what the plan is trying to do.
Completely agree with what you're saying, and I understand. I just think what I have learned in my work in public service is if it's not in writing, it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And so just planting the seed that it's in there,
Yeah.
that, we value our small businesses and the diversity of businesses on Langston Boulevard, and we hope that our property owners will work with us to consider ways to preserve these businesses, right? And having that layered throughout the plan every time we talk about it. Because without that written down, no one's going to know that's what we want. And so while we talk about it, some of these things may not be happening for another 10 years, or maybe none of us are sitting here or working with the county. And so all those people are going to have to reference is this book. So thank you for that discussion.
Chair
All right.
Dorsey, if I can just
Please.
add to that comment too, because I think that what we're trying to convey to the board and others today and in other settings as well is it's important that it's this plan as a piece of many, plans that can guide this corridor. So we need to be reliant on other strategies, other tools, like a toolkit that Natasha mentioned, and it's not just this one plan guiding absolutely everything for Langston Boulevard. It is the retail plan. It is other strategies that the county with AED, helps support retail businesses. And you'll hear that as well as we get into the next set of slides, related to public space or to stormwater management. So we need to be thinking about how we can mention things in this plan, but we may not be able to mention everything in this plan, and we have to be reliant on other plans and policies to make the future of Langston Boulevard happen.
Thank you for that. Okay, Mr. Karantonis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to continue in the conversation with Ms. Talento. I think she hit a very important piece. Part of what a commercial node is, and part of what, these are the engines of the boulevard. These are the first delivery areas. And this is where we should be, in my opinion, learning from the vast experience we have in corridor development in Arlington, including on Columbia Pike, where we have a lot of small businesses, and we have seen, successes and less than successes. So if there is one piece, I understand that we cannot, prescribe an economic plan for Langston Boulevard in a planning document like this. I do understand that, but we could at least, in my opinion, name who would be our partner, our critical partner in that. The Langston Boulevard Alliance is the critical partner for that. These are the people who will be seeing their name. They could be named in the plan to say, yeah, we have somebody who minds the shop, literally here, who is actually working with this business so that you don't wake up tomorrow and you are in a sea of franchisees. And you don't wake up tomorrow and your only, your anchor shops will be 7-Elevens and CVS's, who will be able to manage the issue of how much parking do we need to make these businesses viable? How can we get cycling customers to that? How can we make a niche for small, funky, women minority-owned businesses, et cetera. And I think in Langston there are good bones for this because the wallets are on the street. The corridor has an enormous capacity because of the affluence of the average affluence of its residents, and that creates a lot of opportunity and a lot of challenges as well. Circling back to housing, the issue with mark preservation is that marks need a lot of mass. Mark equals mass. We need a lot of them so that we have a market for marks. If we don't have sufficient, then we are in a continuously supply-starved market, and market rate affordable begins to evaporate like it has been doing for the last 25 years in Arlington. So that is a serious concern. CAFs are our best answer to that at this point. So I understand that the plan focuses on committed affordable housing opportunities, and MARC is still a strategy that we haven't figured out. I'm approaching this conversation here and understanding the goal of geographic distribution. I really want to dive as much as I can in the issue of preservation of marks. There is a significant side conversation to that. We have also condos. Some of them are aging, some of them are, market rate condos, for lack of a better word. And I'm interested in including thinking about how to make sure that these are not redeveloped in something that's completely out of the reach of the people who live there today, as a percentage, as an AMI percentage.
Okay. All right. Mr. DeFranti?
Mr. Chair, I don't quite know the two buckets that we're in. So parking is what I wanted to talk about, but transportation is in the next bucket. And so I have a question on parking, and I promise not to have three questions, but I don't know whether it's now or later.
Why don't you ask it now, and Ms. Ahmed will tell us whether it's appropriate now or later.
That is appropriate given all of the work that you have done. Simultaneously, we agree on transportation being important and a shift from, single occupancy vehicles, which is when I drive to Lee Heights, too often it is after 8 o'clock for dinner, and it's a single occupancy vehicle. We know in order to make the nodes work, I thought it was very helpful to think about Shirlington and Old Town Alexandria, and to think about those, and then also sort of in some contrast to our metro corridors. So we want our businesses to thrive, and it does seem to me that some plan for parking is better than forcing me to say, don't do this. I'll, occasionally, don't tell anybody, but I'll go over to the Safeway in Fairfax County, and I don't want to do that. I want to be in Arlington. And so the question is, what do you think about this planning for parking and putting in the plan sort of some things that incentivize what has happened in Shirlington and in Old Town?
We have heard that comment before, and it's really tied, the planning for parking, at least in terms of the way that the LBA has presented it, is really related to some kind of municipal parking structure, which from a multimodal standpoint, it's probably not the best use of county dollars, simply because there's not that much of it to go around, and we really do need to make improvements to the corridor. Start there first. And parking, it's not that we are envisioning that parking will go away anytime soon. We do recognize that there are single-family homes that do need to be able to travel to and from the corridor or along the corridor in cars, and that will always stay that way. But I think the first problem that we have, and when we did the analysis of the parking utilization along the corridor, we noticed in a lot of because we did very specific site studies of commercial properties and multifamily properties that are pretty dense. And we looked at the utilization rates of those sites, and we found that a lot of them were underutilized. It was really a mix, actually. And Ryan is here, our planning consultant, who did the traffic counting and all of that. And what we found is some sites were overparked, others had no parking, and many were underparked. But the worst problem was not that. It was the fact that the parking wasn't utilized very well. It wasn't integrated. There were parking lots that were, near or adjacent to one another that weren't integrated, that weren't accessible. And so it just made the experience for people, for businesses and for shoppers and all of that sort of frustrating, because it always makes you feel that you can't find parking. So are there areas that need parking? Yes. Are there areas that are overparked? Yes. I think the planning part of the parking is really about, in the future, when new development comes in, is making sure that properties, when they develop, that they integrate, that they share access points and consolidate those access points as much as possible, and work in a way to be more strategic in how they use parking, especially in off times. If you're going to the restaurant, maybe there's an office building that during the day, that at night doesn't need that parking, and you can use that. And there's many other types of parking formats, and that's why the plan always says we encourage all types of formats. We're not going to be we're not going to be putting maximum parking ratios to just, to force everybody out of the car. That's certainly not something that we're going to do. But we've got to be able to balance it, otherwise we will never get a multimodal corridor. So again, we're back to let's see how things evolve.
Sure, that's helpful.
So
Thank
I'm
you.
going to take prerogative and move us along, because we do have the public realm to
Yeah.
address. And just to sort of wrap up where we are from this particular section, a lot of great comments, but a few things to highlight, I think, moving forward, just to make sure staff has captured them. There is an interest in reviewing some of the language around housing, specifically CAFs and marks and the numbers, to ensure consistency in the document, since it does seem to indicate different things at different places, that we further look at language that can specify the desire to create and maintain opportunities for small businesses that are, that are legacy businesses and that are unique and different, and to prevent involuntary displacement as part of this, and that there be further attention paid to any strategies for market affordable units, either preservation of existing ones or not biasing future development, so that we don't have a steady flow of marks throughout the life cycle of this plan. Lots of other stuff that I know you captured, but I did want to highlight those things which seem to be mentioned by multiple people, and now we can move to the public realm conversation.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And if we can go to the next slide, this is actually relatively short. One more slide. Thank you. All right, so the plan includes recommendations for expanding the street grid and identifies additional intersections for future study in all of the neighborhood areas. Next slide. The plan also includes recommendations for bicycle facilities in all neighborhood areas and identifies the types and location of the proposed facilities. Next slide. The greatest concern that we heard regarding the expansion of the street grid is in Area 2 from residents along 25th Street abutting the Harrison Shopping Center. The new street grid expansions will allow for consolidated access to new development, which will reduce driveways along Langston Boulevard and other major streets to improve safety for all users. At this time, There are no changes that are recommended to address this particular concern regarding the street grid expansion in that location. Next slide. So the plan proposes specific recommendations for all segments of Langston Boulevard in areas 2, 3, and 5 West to transform the corridor into a complete street with enhanced bicycle facilities and wide sidewalks that provide space for pedestrians and street trees. In all segments except between Lorcom Lane and Military Road and east of Spout Run, additional right-of-way will be needed to accommodate all modes adequately, which requires redevelopment. Next slide. So there are three main concerns related to the proposed transportation recommendations, which are centered around the desire for greater county participation in achieving the ultimate cross-section for Langston Boulevard, enhanced transit service like BRT, bus rapid transit or premium service, and advanced implementation of transit services to increase ridership. As we know, previous efforts to make Langston Boulevard improvements have required significant time, investment, and coordination with property owners for very marginal results. The corridor includes frequent driveways and surface parking lots, and redevelopment, as I said before, is needed to realize those multimodal improvements. Bus rapid transit is not an appropriate use of constrained right-of-way on Langston Boulevard, as ridership under both existing and planned land uses does not justify a dedicated bus lane. As the corridor redevelops, however, transit demand will continue to be monitored, and the bus service levels will be adjusted to meet that demand. So at this time, again, no changes are recommended to address the concerns related to transportation. Next slide. The plan proposes 28 new privately owned public spaces in the form of parks and plazas. The areas with the most planned density also have the greatest number of public spaces proposed. Next slide. The main concerns related to public spaces are centered around the desire for additional county-owned spaces that can accommodate activities and programs organized by the LBA. The plan's recommendations are responsive to the public space master plan policies. The plan recommends reserving land for privately owned spaces, or POPs, with public access as the main strategy. Reclaiming and repurposing public right-of-way for public space is also envisioned in strategic locations. The county may also strategically assist with certain public space improvements when adjacent redevelopment occurs, depending on site-specific conditions, timing, and funding available at the time. So at this time, there are no changes that are being recommended to address the concerns for public spaces. Next slide. The plan proposes detention and overland relief in specific locations and in each neighborhood area. Next slide. There are two main concerns related to sustainability and resilience, which are centered around the desire for greater county participation in stormwater improvements and providing specific tree canopy targets for private development. Flood mitigation must be planned at the watershed scale, which requires blended engineering approaches to adapt to challenges. The specific goals and mitigation strategies will inform the CIP, or the Capital Improvement Plan. The draft plan is not the only document to generate infrastructure improvements to the CIP. The RAMP, among other policies and regulations, will inform and prioritize resilience strategies along all watersheds, including those along Langston Boulevard. At this time, no changes are recommended to the stormwater recommendations to address this concern. For tree canopy coverage, staff will be adding specific targets for private development in the next draft. And that concludes this section of the presentation, and we can open it back up to County Board discussion.
Terrific, thank you. So you can see that generally, as it relates to the comments and feedback that have been received, there are no significant changes being offered at this time, but we're open to questions and comment. Ms. Talento.
Thank you for the presentation. Really appreciate all the work that staff has taken to invest in this plan. I think I agree with our community leaders who shared that overall it's a good plan. But I do think the conversation we've had today are things to be considered, and I want to talk about the transportation and the public bus piece. And this will take me into parking as well. So here you talk about we're not going to do anything now to increase transit time because there is not showing a need for it at this time, and we'll reevaluate it as we grow. And I have a depreciation for that. But I do, and I don't know, I don't necessarily agree with it, because I think if you don't have a lot of transit, you're not going to call people who depend on transit to that corridor. The other thing that I think people don't think about is there's I believe, an assumption made that if you live in affordable housing, you don't necessarily have a car. But I don't believe that is the case. And I do worry about limiting or reducing parking as, I can't remember if it was a benefit or reducing the ratios for something. If we are not going to do parking hubs, then I think we need to do one-to-one ratio, whatever the current ratio is. I know that goes against our, reducing our car use plan, and I appreciate that. But I think, as Mr. DeFerranti said, north of Langston Boulevard are all single-family homes and car users. There's no transit that's dependable there to get anywhere. And those families need a place to buy groceries, have services like dry cleaning, car repair. All of that is on Langston Boulevard. And they're very close to other places like McLean, the City of Falls Church, Fairfax County. So if they can't access those services in their own community, they can easily go elsewhere. And not having parking available for them is going to be an issue. So if we're not going to do parking hubs, we at least need to make sure that we are not reducing parking ratios with our community. The other thing I want to note is that in affordable housing in particular, I know that we've gone in that route. I have a specific case in Queens Court where it was a mother with a student with disability, and they were having trouble getting their aide to come to serve her son because there was no parking in her building, and it was only paid parking on the street. And the aide is not a high-income earner, so he couldn't afford $15 a day, and his company wouldn't reimburse him. So I worked with the county to try to find plans, but that's one person who happens to know advocates and leaders. What about all of our other community members who are struggling with this challenge? So I just really, and I share that story because I think that in our hopes to really focus on climate change, like I get it, there's no excuse on climate change today, but we can be the best climate change in the community, but then we're not going to have a diverse community. Because right now, climate change is expensive. Electric cars are expensive, hybrid cars are expensive, and we still have to determine how we're going to support our community members who don't have access to support climate change due to income. So I really worry about the parking and about, I want us to really think about how we're addressing that need and not making, especially if we're not going to have public transit, the people who are going to be looking at affordable housing are probably going to be people with cars because they don't need that to bend that transit. And I know for a fact that if you depend on transit, you only look for housing along transit corridors. So I just wanted to, I have one more thing to mention. Well, I think that covers two of my things, Christian, so I'll turn it
Great,
over.
if you can
Thank
hold that other one and we'll get everybody in there.
If I could just follow up on transportation a little more. Thank you. Appreciate Ms. Talento talking about that. Could you talk just a little more about why BRT won't work? I know parts of it, because I think, they're looking at Route 7 in places in some place, and we've looked at Columbia Pike. I mean, there are places where it can work, which speeds things up, then maybe you mix in traffic, and then you've got something a little more. And maybe there's some things that we shave off a little bit, or we have, turning lanes or something, so we don't have. Anyway, could you talk about that a little more? Because it feels like it's kind of a great corridor to just.
Yeah, so Kristen Culkins, long-range transportation planner with DES. So we do envision transit on the corridor. I think one of the things I almost want to circle back is to the fact that our TSP, our Transit Strategic Plan, is happening right now. And one of the recommendations in the TSP is actually more bus service in this area. We're not at 10-minute headways yet. We don't have the demand for riders for it. But we are, through that 10-year strategic plan, already recognizing the need for additional transit service along the corridor. So it's coming. It's one of the things that DES will monitor as Langston Boulevard is realized, as the county's, transportation needs continue to evolve. We do anticipate transit along the corridor. The plan says 10-minute headways as we need it. We are balancing it with a lot of other transit needs throughout the county, but I do want to reiterate that we know we need transit along Langston Boulevard. Whether that's BRT or not, BRT is kind of a gold standard. That's what we've got on Crystal City and Potomac Yard. That's BRT. So that type of investment in transit is very unique. It's very heavy. What we think makes a lot of sense on Langston Boulevard are enhancements as appropriate. So like we can do queue jumps, we can do transit priority signals, we can do enhanced bus stops, maybe not to the same capacity as Columbia Pike. Columbia Pike is the highest ridership transit route in the Commonwealth. That is bus. But we do anticipate that as the plan's realized, as redevelopments come in, those parcels that sit next to a bus stop, we're going to be looking for enhancements from those developers. The county will come in through partnerships and look at opportunities where we're not seeing those enhancements come through redevelopment to enhance the transit experience for riders. I know we've talked a little bit about how it's a constrained corridor and we need just space from these developers, these property owners, just to realize wider sidewalks. We don't have the wiggle room in order to get even more space for transit, but we really do think that through the redevelopment, through strategic investments at intersections, enhanced bus stops, real-time arrival information, that we can change the experience for transit riders along the corridor.
Thank you. Yeah, I should have, I'm clear, it can't really be real BRT, but the enhancement, that helps a lot. And it's such a hard, because as Ms. Talento pointed out, it's the chicken and the egg. So there are people who want transit, who would go there if they have chance, but they don't have chance, so they don't come. And because they're not there, we don't do transit. And because we don't have transit, they don't come. So that's, I know, a hard one that we're constantly kind of working on. But thank you for the answer. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Karantonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On parking, my feedback is, I understand the open approach to say, we are open for every iteration. I do think that in the conversations that we will have until adoption, that we should think more carefully whether we should propose some preferred ways to deal with parking. Like, for example, ancillary parking, like, more concentrated parking in certain places, and say, well, if somebody comes with a project that concentrates parking that can be more efficiently used and serving a bit of a bigger pedestrian, if the place is more pedestrian friendly, it can, accommodate more efficient delivery on parking. I think that this kind of thinking hasn't found an entrance in our planning yet, and this is an opportunity to do this. I don't know if I explained myself well enough, but what I'm looking is, we've seen places, even here in the metropolitan area, there are, if you go to Bethesda, for example, they have, concentrated parking, and so they avoid to have to deliver parking in every single block and every single building. They have one central place. It's like 3 to 5 minutes away, but it's fine and it works. And it offers, in terms of, climate resiliency, later the opportunity to repurpose these assets. While if we have parking built in every place, this is way more difficult to do. Plus, it adds a lot of cost to the construction, and we know who pays the piper here, and that's affordable housing most of the time. So the second thing that I wanted to ask, so I understand the transit network, that it will be high frequency and high availability. For me, this is important. I would love to see a mention of wanting to serve also schools with this network. I think this is an excellent corridor to do that, and I would like to see some language referring to this. And on cycling, we've heard, I think that, I applaud you for the effort to provide bicycle facilities and protected bike lanes. My question is, do you think that they are enough, or that, what is the community's feedback on their functionality?
I'm sorry, I missed that part. Of the bicycle
bike
facilities
lanes
on
that are-
Langston?
Yes.
Or everywhere?
Along Langston.
Yeah, we've heard mixed feedback, but for the most part, I'm going to say that the majority of people do support the bicycle facilities directly on Langston. At one point, we considered, just the parallel routes for certain parts of the corridor that are very constrained in terms of the right-of-way. This is west of Glebe, where it's really constrained. And those who are very avid bikers were very concerned that they didn't have a way to get through the corridor on the corridor. Certainly, we need the alternate routes. I think that was their point, but they want to be able to provide that as a sort of for people who use it to really commute to work, and not just for leisure.
I want to dive a little bit deeper on this in a separate conversation on this. I understand that every model supports also the critical vital point of so many square feet of retail, et cetera. We are at the advent of electric biking, et cetera. This will be moving a lot more people, because in a tough topography like Langston Boulevard has, this is a great solution that wasn't available today. So I think that this is a model that needs to be looked very, very carefully, along with transit that complements the options here. Thank you.
I'll say that our cross-sections do that. We incorporated a dedicated, separated from pedestrian traffic, separated from vehicular traffic for areas 2, 3, and 5 for each of those. So there's dedicated, not even just in the roadway for most of this areas, anywhere we have redevelopment, completely curb separated on both sides for bikes and scooters in all of the cross-sections.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. DeFranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'd align myself with Mr. Karantonis on the nuance on parking. I think your answer was satisfactory in that broad brush, but I don't know, each of the nodes is different. And so, you know how there's, in the plan currently, there's a cutout section on biophilia, which I think is important. I could also envision alluding to some of the tools that you suggested to consolidate development that might deliver additional parking, or even, just to be concrete, that there might be a single node at which some of the strategies in Bethesda and Shirlington might be useful. So I'm mindful that there is a responsibility we have on climate to encourage people not to drive. But my experience, with the 52 and the 53 as they come by my own house, and the 72 is that induced demand, particularly on the 52 and 53, aren't there. I've now ridden almost every bus in Arlington. The 55 feels different, and the 3Y I haven't taken, but investing in infrastructure a little bit around there might be helpful. I guess, to your point, I think Ms. Hawkins, I think you sort of, there's a development must do this or the CIP must do this. And I want us to be able to try to add CIP funding where it's strategic, because I don't believe that, I think we do need to invest. Just stormwater is a problem everywhere. We need to invest economically in Langston Boulevard, even if equity might say that it could be nuanced with respect to other parts of the county. We still need to invest. And so that's the thought on transportation. And then, mindful of time, I'll just say that there's a couple of these items, PF8 that talks about consolidation of recreation facilities. We haven't yet talked about the Lee Arts Center. We know that there is a shift happening there, but I still do think that you could both be for an expanded Dawson Terrace and enough recreational facilities, including the Lee Arts Center. And you asked, I think at one point you all asked for what we agree with, disagree with. PF8, I'm struggling with a little bit. And then PS1 and PS2, I think I've just made the case, tried to make the case that a little public spaces and public investment, at least this is one board member who'd love a conversation with staff about whether there's room for a little addition in that piece of the plan. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, go back again to Vice Chair Garvey.
Thank you. Is it okay if we leave transportation and get to resiliency? That's everybody's done with. Sure. Thank you. I think this is probably part of where we overlap with other plans, because I'd like to see. Have we mapped? And I did look through this, but I started going faster towards the end. Have we mapped heat islands along Langston Boulevard?
If Ryan can recall, I know we've looked at it earlier on at the beginning when we were doing the existing conditions analysis, but I haven't seen it in a while, so I'll be honest. But
Yeah, so
yes.
maybe, that's fine. I mean, where I'm heading in a way is, one, I think probably would be a good thing to do, maybe. And then I would love, and this isn't just Langston Boulevard, I'm realizing I don't want to see another flat top building that doesn't have an amenity on it and that doesn't have solar or green. And it feels like there maybe needs to be some, can we kind of up the discussion a little bit that we just need to put green things on top of roofs or solar panels on top of roofs everywhere. And again, I know that's not just Langston Boulevard, but that's something I think we need to do, but maybe we can kind of nudge it along here. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lonto.
Thank you. Just to keep on the stormwater thread, I wanted to get a clarifying point. Many of and I just want to make sure I understand this correctly, many of the existing structures, buildings on Langston Boulevard are not meeting current standards on how to mitigate stormwater on their properties. So any redevelopment would require minimum standards, whether they give us a benefit on increasing that, regardless of how we look at it, stormwater management is going to be improved with every new development. Is that correct?
It is correct, and I can call Dimitra to come online so she can explain a little bit further. But yes, it is correct that any project has to mitigate their runoff directly on site. But because the sites are already highly impervious,
Yeah.
they can't make it any worse. In other words, what they might have to be required to improve is going to be very minimal.
Okay.
Because they're already at the worst that they can be. And that's to oversimplify it. Apologies, I'm not a
that's okay.
stormwater engineer, but if Dimitra wants to add anything.
Well, the only reason I
can
want to be thoughtful of time, the only reason I bring it up is I don't know if a lot of our community members understood that piece, right? And so there's been
Yes.
this advocacy that the county has to invest in stormwater on our own. And I'm not saying we shouldn't consider that, but I just want to be very clear for everyone to know that with any new redevelopment, stormwater mitigation will be improved because there's a new code standard that exists.
If and only if they do special exception development and they're coming in asking for additional incentives. If they're just doing by right development.
Okay.
But with this plan, there is an opportunity because of the incentives that we're building in.
Okay.
For us to require detention, higher expectations for mitigating stormwater on site and a slew of other things.
Okay, thank you. Christian Dorsey, I have closing comments. Should I just wrap up my last issue? Do you want me to wait?
No, not yet. I
Okay.
think we're still getting into substantive questions. Mr. DeFerranti?
Oh, sorry, I'm ready to wrap. When you are.
Okay. Then I'll
Yep.
read. If you've got a question, go ahead.
Yeah, it's just a question. So the Green Boulevard concept, right? So what are the elements of the Green Boulevard concept? It's just the stormwater management and the on-site energy production. How does this, and specifically, I've seen, it's a very recent thing. I mean, green corridor development is a relatively recent, unfortunately recent. I've seen that normally plans are detailing what's the role of government, what's the role of individuals, what's the role of stakeholders, what's the role of investors, and the combination of all these comes into the plan and says, yes, this is what Arlington County will do: stormwater, transportation, green spaces, tree canopy, biophilia. Then there is a section that says, oh, and we expect now everybody else to do the following, reduce the trips, build more resilient buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So how does the plan address that in specific terms so that somebody can say, yes, this is plan compliant and this is not?
That's a good point. We are going to come back to the plan and add a little bit more specificity to what, are some of our expectations in terms of, again, meeting that goal for greening the corridor. You're right, it is a combination of public and private interventions. Let's say from the public, it's pretty simple. We know that there are roads that have way too much asphalt and the county can come in if there's a funding allocated for that in the future and add green infrastructure and reduce paving and all of that. But for the private sector, our maps indicate not only the location of new privately owned public spaces, but there's a number of greenways that intersect various parcels. And so if they're redeveloping, they're going to be required to build space for these green corridors that are going to help to connect. And then they're going to be required to enhance the streetscapes, to add street trees. The majority, that's why 70% of the core is impervious, is because the majority of it has no trees. And so when you look at the map, it's about greening everywhere we can with new development. And we've heard it before, it's not building out, building up, so that we can reserve space on the ground. We can add green roofs and in multiple levels of the building, not just at the ground level. We've got to think creatively in the various levels as well as on the faces of the building. So wherever we can is adding green elements to buildings to again, mitigate the heat index. And it's just a combination. It's a layer of different interventions or strategies.
Yeah, sure, thank you.
So technical question, back to transportation a little bit. As it relates to our assessment of what to do with 29 and multimodal improvements along Langston Boulevard, since VDOT owns it, have they put any hard constraints that have limited our thinking about either what improvements could be achieved and when they can be achieved. I'm hearkening back to Columbia Pike, where they made life quite difficult for the county for a long time in thinking about that.
So VDOT has been kind of a partner throughout the whole process. They've reviewed all of the different iterations of the plan. At this point, VDOT is in the when you're ready to do something, come to us, and we will do transportation analyses in partnership with VDOT. I think we learned a lot from the Columbia Pike experience, so hopefully anything we do and work towards along Langston Boulevard will have that benefit. So they've not said no. They've not looked at any of our cross sections and said this just isn't achievable. It's all been continue the analysis and we'll work with you moving forward.
But they're still holding the posture of we reserve judgment to offer a final analysis until, okay, all right.
It is a VDOT roadway.
Yeah, there we go. Okay, all right.
We do the same thing.
Even on Columbia Pike, they let us with conditions, right?
Oh, there are so many conditions. Anyway, the next piece was, I'll just say in terms of the privately owned public spaces, knowing that this is addressed better and more specifically in the public spaces master plan, I'll just note that I think some of the concerns that we're hearing from the community is the assessment that some privately owned public spaces feel less public than others, and in cases where it's done well, people don't know that they're privately owned spaces, but there are other cases where it's quite apparent that this is public in legality only. So for our general public who's concerned about that as far as an approach to guiding development on the corridor, we have considered that. It's addressed in other planning documents that the county has, but maybe there's an opportunity to speak to the quality of the privately owned public spaces with a little bit more specificity in this plan. Ms. Garvey.
Yeah, one question along that, it just occurred to me. When we're analyzing looking at all the public spaces, do we break out how many are focused on like children playgrounds? I mean, I'm thinking, one thing, because this is incredibly, everything's in here. I'm really impressed with, but we haven't called out like specifically childcare. I'm looking at basically family friendly, making it so it's really comfortable, so that, because parks can be a whole lot of different things, and sometimes it's that children feel really welcome and it's great for them to go, and sometimes not so much. And you probably want to make sure that that's kind of distributed. So I don't know if we want to get that in there somehow too, and that could be either the public or the private spaces. Probably something to consider.
So we have in the report or in the plan identified where certain neighborhoods have requested more of those types of spaces for children, playgrounds specifically. But we understand that at the time, when the project comes in for development, it might be in 5 years, it might be in 10, and we won't know what the actual need is and the actual space that needs to be provided. And so those things would be hopefully ironed out at that point. And because it's in the plan, it will be mentioned. It will be said, this is what the community wanted. Is this still a need? And that would be verified and worked through the process.
Yeah, that would be great. I would venture that it's always needed. It's kind of, if you build it, they will come, and maybe it's not. So you want to have, and obviously distributed throughout just like the heat islands, knowing kind of where are your hot spots, where are your problems. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, or are you all ready to move in your closing thoughts and final salvos?
Mr. Chair, can I just add
Please.
something back in? The discussion that we had about the stormwater management improvements, we do want to make it clear that by right development does have some requirements, but they're very light. And so I think that really the main message is, again, we still want to provide incentives for special exception development where we can have a little bit more conversation and say about the design of that, but and certainly be making greater strides than what we would be getting through by right development. So, and if we need to say more about that as we move forward at the time of staff report review and the RTA, we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll start this end. Mr. DeFerranti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are 3 words in one, and I think it's page 8, the vision that talks about sustainability, environmental resilience, and equity as the foundational pieces of this. And I feel that we have done a lot of work, and then we've sort of done, a lot of work, and then there's this last 10% or 20% of the time from a staff standpoint can be defining for how the product actually meets the standards that Ms. Chesron said about, are we facing this huge climate change crisis that we've seen all summer? So, on sustainability, that could be economic or it could be environmental. I would just submit that some CIP funding, I don't think that we should be over-promising, but I also think that I want to sort of put in a plug there that for stormwater, for green, I think we need to be willing to invest in order to address that challenge. On environmental resilience, I want to think more about every roof, every flat roof. We have to be careful there how we do that, but I do think either green or solar is important, and that could help us reach this step. And then the last point is tricky because the scope of this plan and several of our letters, the housing letter from EMBs of Northern Virginia, several of the letters talk about how critical East Falls Church is. And that's a difficult one because I think the slide said it's a next year thing. And I accept that. I also will share that my intention next year is to share this thought again about how I think East Falls Church is an important spot for reaching some of our equity and housing goals. And I hope I haven't either said too much, but it is sort of the truth of the moment for me. And I think that we have to try and reach equity there. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Talento, are you ready?
I am.
All right.
Thank you. I'll actually start off well, first, I just want to reiterate how much I appreciate the work that's gone into this plan. I know it's been many years in the making, and the engagement of the community and the thoughtfulness that has been put in is very much appreciated. I know there's been a lot of hard work and time and investment into this, and so I don't want that to be overlooked. And I think that the feedback that at least I'm providing today is really to reemphasize what Mr. DeFerranti shared about really perfecting that vision, refining that vision, and making sure that our goals aren't inadvertently missed because we weren't thinking through some thoughts. I do think this is a semi-suburban corridor, and it's unique to Arlington, so I want us to be very intentional, and that's where a lot of the feedback that at least I've shared today has come from. With that in mind, I want to echo that I really believe we need to be intentional about investment in CAFs on Langston Boulevard, and making sure that we are investing in CAFs, that we're also seeing a continuum of marks, because I don't think we're going to achieve that anywhere else north of Langston Boulevard. And it's such important to the diversity of our community, especially as we look to blur the line of South and North Arlington and making sure that we're reaching our goals of being inclusive and a diverse community here. Which brings me to my next point that we didn't touch on today, but I just want to highlight our cultural and historical resources. It's mentioned in the plan. We didn't talk about it today, but I want to make sure that I think there's a recommendation from one of our communities, I can't remember which because we've read so many, that talks about ensuring that it's part of the language in, I don't know if it's community benefits or something like that, and I can share that with staff later, but it talks about including, asking our developers to think about cultural and historic resources. Langston Boulevard has such a rich history for our community. It is some of the places where we have actually changed the course of the whole state of Virginia. When we look at the integration of Dorothyham, we still have a remnant of the wall in Halls Hills. If we don't intentionally talk about the culture that exists there, the culture that existed there, and the culture that may come, we will lose it. Some of that has happened on the Pike, and so I just want to make sure that we don't lose sight of that. And then I do also agree with making sure that we look at emphasizing solar or green roofs as we do redevelopment. And I don't believe that we should be consolidating community centers. It's a long strip, and if we're looking at increasing affordable housing as well as other type of housing, they need places to connect. And so I think that where we have land, we should really think about making sure that it is available to the community to be used as a community space instead of consolidation. And I will end with asking that we really define a date for the Cherrydale plan and the East Falls Church plan to align with Langston Boulevard. dates really allow for points of action. I have not had a chance to research those two plans, but if you look at, let me look at the page on, I think I flagged it. And I want to be thoughtful of time, so if I don't find it quickly, I will ignore it. But there's a page in our PowerPoint that talks about our CAFs and our marks, and East Falls Church and Cherrydale have some of the lowest. And so I just want to make sure that we are looking at the Langston Boulevard holistically. I recognize that these two communities have done a lot of investment in making sure their communities reflected what their goals were. But as we are looking at developing the whole boulevard, we need to be holistic. And so really seeing how we can support them in aligning with the Langston Boulevard plan and make sure that they're defined dates and applied resources for staff to work with them to do that. And I worry that without that noted in our plan, we might lose sight of it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. For my closing comments, I'll try to be brief. I'll just say, first of all, this is an impressive body of work. I mean, 170 plus pages of a document. We didn't really talk about the area that I'll be especially interested in, and that's the implementation matrix moving forward. But I do want to just acknowledge the tremendous and what I think is exceptionally high quality work that has been done, that's gone into this thus far. Documenting the existing conditions, building upon the work of the community, really sussing out the vision and values of Arlington County and all of our relevant plans, along with the expectations of the community, and applying good land use planning tools to a very idiosyncratic corridor and coming up with some innovative approaches where necessary. It's really a great body of work, and so I'm appreciative of it. I recognize that for many in our community, they look at some things. I think the general sentiment that we're hearing overall is this is welcome for Langston Boulevard overall. And there are some specific areas where people have maybe different ideas, and that's certainly appropriate. And I think you've done a pretty good job of bringing that word balance into the equation. And I'll just pontificate for a second and say that for me, balance is not, what is the most extreme one on one side, the most extreme on another, and let me just come up with something else. It's really coming up with something that likely is going to make either of those sides really not loving it, but is nonetheless appropriate at this level. And to remind people again what this level is, this is not the end of the story. This is something that generally provides expectations for what will be specific project level detailed proposals which will come along at some point. They may be based on the parcels that we've identified now, or they could be an assemblage of parcels that we have not yet envisioned. But it is through this work that we will begin to, I believe, shape what are good, reasonably good proposals that staff can then evaluate with greater ability to control a positive outcome than they would otherwise. And one thing that I'll just also say about housing, we can get into a lot of conversation about the number and marks and CAFs and all that. I just do want to remind everyone that the documented plan comes up with a goal of increasing the number of attainable units, the percentage of them as part of the overall units than what exists with current conditions. So regardless of what we project about the number, the plan is actually projecting that we do better as it relates to providing a diversity of housing types at different incomes than what we're experiencing on the Langston Boulevard corridor already. Finally, I will note that, Ms. Talento, you've been instrumental in shaping my thinking on this. This plan, for all of its 170 pages and a lot of language, doesn't say everything, and that's by design. We have other plans that speak to things more fully. But the lens that I think we maybe want to take with the final reading and drafting of this is recognizing that developers and property owners, they will be given the guidance to make sure that they reference other plans when they engage with staff to think about what they could do with their property. For the resident of the community, they may look at this plan as the only thing that they may need to know. And while we do a good job of referencing other plans within it, most people are not going to approach it that way. So where we can say a little bit more to make sure we're giving a completer view of what our vision is, we should take that opportunity. Ms. Garvey.
All right, thank you. So it is really impressive. And I realized that it all started with residents, and I was actually there. So it was remarked how many, Ms. Chesron and Ms. Brown, how many board members they've worked with. I'm the one you started with, and we're going to finish. So I've been here for the whole trip, the whole ride. And I haven't been as involved at times as others have. But I realize I've really seen, this is kind of, I think, what the Arlington way, which is an amorphous term, kind of really is at its best in a way. One thing is it takes a long time. We're at 11 years and counting. But it started with residents looking at what needed to, and doing incredible work as residents, and then the board and staff coming in, and what a professional report and everything. You are getting pretty much everything in there. And I think one of the a bit of evidence on how successful you've been is that there wasn't huge upset when this came out. We have had staff, well, there might be upset coming down. I see that, knock on wood, always good to do. But it didn't land with a thunk and everybody getting it, which does happen sometimes. And that's just a testament to everybody's work, from residents to staff, really over a long period of time. And I find myself thinking, I won't go into, so we've brought up details here, and we're going to continue to work on things and refine it. But it's really a transition. I think timing is everything. I think when we started this plan, we were all thinking in the 20th century. And now we're finishing up, and I think we're in the 21st. I think if way back then, we wouldn't have focused on climate change the way, we've been through that July 19th storm. We're watching what's going on. We're like, oh my gosh, we got to do something. So we're focused on that. We've been through a pandemic. We see a transition with the economy. We know we've got to do things differently. Transportation too. So although it's taken a really long time, I actually think we've kind of ended up at just the right time. So I'm really impressed. I'm looking forward to finishing this out, and thank you so very much for the work, and this is it's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carantonis, last word.
Thank you. I will try to be brief as well. First of all, thank you for the amazing work. I had the opportunity to walk with you, to come to the studios, talk to a lot of constituents, residents and not residents of Langston Boulevard. And I think that there is a general appreciation and acknowledgement of the work here. It's also, after all, as Ms. Garvey just said, yes, this is citizen-driven, this is resident-driven. And one of the nice things about that is that at the end, the composition reflects the aspirations and the goals of a community today, also the thinking of a community today. And we see that in novelties that come in this plan. Starting off saying that this will be a green boulevard is a big step forward. We haven't had that before. This is the first one. And so in the conversations that we'll have until the RTA, and beyond that, I really want to focus on how we make that more conveyable, what exactly we are expecting, not only from ourselves as the government of Arlington, local government, but also from the communities, from the neighborhoods, from individuals, from investors, from everybody, from everybody else. And this conditions a little bit my take on parking, my take on heights, my take on stormwater management, my take on greenways, which is another novelty. This is the second plan that has a similar concept. And I think that the more we can be more inspirational as well as aspirational, we should say, this is what we envision, this is how it should be, etc. Because I believe that what remains from this planning over time, because corridors, I learned that the hard way on Columbia Pike and the soft way as well, it is a good start. It sets the rules of the game. It sets the frame. It frames the conversation, but then it takes on its own life. Communities continue to implement the plan. They continue to build the place. So for this reason, I think that, and I will, come back or circle back to previous comment I made. I think that naming who the community center point will be the Langston Boulevard Alliance in this sense, where everybody comes together, is an important investment in the success of the plan as we go ahead. It is a good thing to say who will be in charge of, besides the government, besides the abstract and specific community actors, who will be in the center, who will be the convener of this. And I believe that this is important to say. More conversations to be had. I have we didn't touch on everything. I think arts is an important part. I think Ms. Talento touched upon historical preservation. That's also an important part because this conveys the desire to have quality and have a place that's recognizable through generations. So thank you for the work, and I look forward to the conversations to come.
Okay, so with that, Ms. Alfonso Hamed, Ms. Smith, and Ms. Calkins, thank you for presenting. Ms. Chesrown, Ms. Brown, thank you for presenting the community perspective. I will note that there are a number of people who are in attendance who I think you made sure were assembled in the event that we got into really granular questions. About 20 staff members, both in person and virtual. Thank you all for your work on this. And I believe we also had our consultant who sort of helped us along the way from the very beginning from AECom. Welcome, and thank you for being here. This is a huge effort. We got more to go. And speaking of what the more to go is, colleagues, our job is to make sure that we immediately take the discussion and conversation from this work session, focus ourselves on the Langston Boulevard area plan, and make sure as soon as we can, but no later than the end of the week, you surface any new bodies of work that staff has not yet really gone into any depth on. That is your job that I'll task you with. And then from here, we expect that the next time the board will consider this will be in October, but up until then, going to be lots of meetings with various commissions and other bodies as it relates to the area plan. Any other questions, comments? All right, we are adjourning this work session, and I will make the following motion as we have a closed meeting matter to discuss. I move that the county board convene a closed meeting as authorized by Virginia Code Section 2.23711A1 for discussions regarding a personnel matter regarding a board employee. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Vice Chair Garvey. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it, and the board is now in closed session. Thanks, everyone.